to look at some different ways in which our faith speaks to creation and the way in which we live our faith, what we say we believe when it comes to relating to the environment and our treatment of the environment. There's a number of scriptural passages that we can point to, certainly lots amongst Luther's writings, that sort of relate to creation and our treatment of the environment. We're going to get straight into the gospel texts, so it sort of goes straight into what Jesus said or the way Jesus lived. Part of the reason that we discuss this now, and when I say now, I mean in the 21st century here in North America and so on, is that it is an issue. We've become sort of removed from living on the land, you might say, and back in the day, whether it's first century Mediterranean culture or 16th century Europe, where Luther was and so on, people were just more naturally connected to the land because they were working with animals, they were growing their own food a lot of the time, and nowadays with superstores and roads and cars and planes and the way we communicate with technology just keeps us a little bit more removed. It's easy to sort of stay indoors all the time. It's easy to not be aware of how food is produced. It's easy to sort of be removed from that. And so this conversation is meant to open that up, particularly from a faith perspective. And I've got a couple of books too that I would just sort of commend to you. This one's by Sally McFaig, Blessed Are the Consumers, Climate Change and the Practice of Restraint, which is just the title there tells you something about how we might think of our lives of faith. And then this is the Green Bible, which it's got green letters in it, as opposed to sometimes you've heard of red letter edition Bibles and so on. This one's got green letters wherever there's something that has reference to planet or environment and so on. And it's got a foreword by Desmond Tutu, and even the binding of it is supposed to be environmentally friendly. I think it's got some hemp in the binding and stuff like that too. Look at the birds of the air, they neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? And can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your span of life? And why do you worry about your clothing? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow, they neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not clothed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which is alive today and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, will he not much more clothe you, you of little faith? I put that out there and invite your reflections, your conversation on that. Is there anything that sort of hits you in that? Is it?
I think most recently I got stuck on the first, wonderfully stuck on the first three lines there about the birds.
Yeah.
And thinking about like right outside our window, kitchen window, which I hang out quite often. Gus, my husband, put a bird feeder, right? And him and I sometimes look out that window, because he does feed them, -30 with a 60-click wind, and the little sparrows, or the little, whatever they are, they just come and they puff their feathers out. They look so big and they're not. Yeah. And they are taken care of.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. They are taken care of, so look how we are taken care of. But I couldn't get the little guys out of my mind, so I needed to say that.
Yeah, thank you.
They are cared for.
It's a beautiful image, yeah. Either make the tree good and its fruit good, or make the tree bad and its fruit bad, for the tree is known by its fruit. You brood of vipers, how can you speak good things when you are evil? For out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks. The good person brings good things out of a good treasure, and the evil person brings evil things out of an evil treasure. I tell you, on the day of judgment, you will have to give an account for every careless word you utter. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. And Matthew weeping and gnashing of teeth, kind of.
Well, just in terms of caring for creation, I think in this context, that kind of verse can remind us of the fact that there is accountability.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
As much as, often we'll read that and say, oh yeah, judgmental God, but if we take it, I think, in the appropriate context, I would say, well, we're accountable. We just can't just do what we want, and in terms of the world we're living in, there's accountability there for how we behave and act and speak, regardless.
Absolutely. I think in terms of church communities too, I mean, we're sort of modeling the faith to the world around us too, right? If we're, every week putting a massive bag of trash on the curb for the guy to come and pick up and take to the landfill, that's probably not the best sort of thing to be sort of saying to the rest of the world, you should be living like this too. We should be engaging in recycling and all the rest, right? As I was getting a cup of water for Jeff downstairs, I was thinking, oh, styrofoam, great. With the thought on dominion and having dominion over the earth too, I mean, we have sort of theologized even ourselves into this place of being apart from creation. I think that's a bit of what you were saying at the start, that we aren't sort of part of the world or part of the structure of beings and so on, that we're somehow out of that. And so really, I think that's what we're trying to get back to in some of the conversations we're having these days in churches. He put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to someone who sowed good seed in his field. But while everybody was asleep, an enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat, and then went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared as well. And the slaves of the householder came and said to him, Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? Where then did these weeds come from? He answered, An enemy has done this. The slave said to him, Then do you want us to go and gather them? But he replied, No, for in gathering the weeds you would uproot the wheat along with them. Let both of them grow together until the harvest, and at the harvest time I will tell the reapers, Collect the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn. He put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that someone took and sowed in his field. It is the smallest of all the seeds, but when it is grown, it is the greatest of shrubs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches.
We are not the ones to judge. So in this, I understand it to mean that almost like you're not going to call them weeds throughout the life cycle.
Yeah.
You're going to let them grow, but at the point of judgment that God will do, He'll pick those weeds, or not us. But I'm going to live in harmony with them. In fact, I'm going to share the same soil, and just grow myself as a weed.
Right.
And let that burning be done by somebody else.
Right.
By God.
Is that good news?
I don't know about the burning, but the sharing soil, not judgment, absolutely.
Yeah, maybe a freeing thing. Yeah.
I got a question kind of on the Revelation timeline for all this, because it seems to be a bit of a revelatory reference in this verse here.
Okay.
The separation of the weeds and the wheat for the burning. I guess I've always kind of been under the interpretation of a grand reconciliation in Armageddon.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if anyone's Revelation knowledge is sufficient enough to correct me on that there is an eternal damnation component to Revelation, and there is a salvation component, or is
There's all salvation.
yeah. I was kind of the all salvation boat myself, but I haven't read Revelation in a long time.
Can I bring us back to this passage, maybe instead of the damnation thing? What I take from this, and one thought that's sort of crossed my mind a time or two around this, is that it's not necessarily that every person might be a weed or wheat, but that everybody's got it about, like all of it about themselves. And maybe it's the junk of us that gets stripped away, and then the good stuff that stays.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just that some people are all of a sudden going to be in hell. Does that make some sense?
100%.
Yeah,
That's a
kind of where
very
I
nice
go.
clarification, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, we all got a garden of wheat and weeds
Yeah.
amongst us.
Yeah, that's how I tend to hear this. He also said, the kingdom of God is as if someone would scatter seed on the ground, and would sleep and rise night and day, and the seed would sprout and grow, and he does not know how. The earth produces of itself, the first the stalk, then the head, then the full grain in the head. But when the grain is ripe, at once he goes in with his sickle, because the harvest has come. He also said, with what can we compare the kingdom of God? Or what parable will we use for it? It is like a mustard seed, which when sown upon the ground is the smallest of all the seeds on the earth. Yet when it is sown, it grows up and becomes the greatest of all shrubs, and puts forth large branches, so that the birds of the air can make nests in its shade. A thought, even when we were reading the version from Matthew, it's kind of a funny thing. It becomes the greatest of all shrubs. Right? A shrub, in my mind anyway, is still a pretty small thing. And then also the idea that birds can make nests in its branches too. I guess you could have chickadees or little birds that might sort of zip around in there, but yeah, the greatest of all shrubs. I like to think too, like I really like these kingdom of God parables too, when they talk about something small, whether it's leaven in the lump or seed in the ground and so on, that it's something that I think is affirming and maybe heartening to a church, a wider church that is struggling with decline or with its own sense of size and what ought to be sort of grandeur. Like we don't have to be big. I mean, nationally, we're not a very big church. There's 150,000 Lutherans in the ELCIC, roughly. And, pardon me? And in the Anglican Church, too, I mean, it's about 600,000. I mean, it's significantly more. But still, it's less than the population of Winnipeg.
Yes.
And as a church, generally, too, and I think it probably holds true even for Anglicans, too, that there's been decline as well. Is that fair to say? Yeah. So we become sort of influential, and we may not see the outcome of the work we do. That seeds are planted, and then what grows could be beyond our lifetime. I appreciated that actually in the texts that we heard a few weeks ago in the season of Advent too, that they point to something beyond and to something coming, and we tend to sort of think of ourselves as always going to be a part of it, but that may not be the case, that what we're pointing to is something bigger, and we are working towards something that's more about the common good, really. Which is very much what caring of creation is about, right? Looking at the effects we have on future generations.
Okay, so what I'm going to cover is just sort of some of the things that are currently being done sort of on behalf of a lot of our own members. So, like within the ELCIC, on our website, there's a strong push for the Stewardship of Creation Initiative, which is in partnership with Kairos. And what this is it just has a number of different resources available. There's sort of a sub-context of the Stewardship of Creation is the Greening Congregation Accreditation Program. And what this is an accreditation program of congregations that have made a very deliberate push to become a green congregation. Within our region here, it's not very well known or promoted, and so there's no one within the Manitoba Northwestern Ontario Synod that has this accreditation. However, our group at St. Mark's has... Oh, did they?
Yeah, Thunderbird, our Saviors does.
Okay, they're not on the ELCIC website. I was looking at it yesterday. Yeah, but so there's only one in the MNO which has this accreditation, and it's not a lot of difficult things. It's, you know, implementing your own recycling program, implementing compost, and just things that can be done on an everyday basis that aren't anything too extravagant. Like, they're not telling you need to go put in solar panels. Obviously, it gives these as options, but it gives you a whole checklist of things to go through that your church can do and what the congregation members can do as well. And so I think this is this kind of things that's kind of point to your question from before as to what we as churches can do to affect political change. As a bit of a digression, I was recently at the COP20 meetings in Lima, Peru, like the Conference of Parties, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And so being there, the biggest thing I realized is that there's very little political will to make any meaningful movements in terms of climate change policy. And where I think this push needs to come from is from the grassroots level, because if politicians know that people want this to happen, then that's what politicians will do. But right now, there's not enough push from the constituents to make politicians really take this up as a serious concern. And as churches, I think we have a lot of clout within our own communities to really try to make this happen. So if as a congregation you can decide, okay, we're going to become a green congregation, hopefully this will start to disseminate among its members, who will then take these green sort of initiatives, take it to their home lives, and then hopefully that'll spread out to their neighbors. And then if this becomes a much more talked about and pushed thing, then it's more likely that politicians will actually start to realize it. And I know within the ELCIC we have an official statement on our resource extraction and the idea of climate justice, that I'll get into climate justice a little bit more, but the ELCIC has a strong statement on this. I know our national bishop is often writing letters to the different ministers, and I know letter writing only goes so far, but she's representing 150,000 Lutherans. If we have other church groups who are doing the same thing, that's covering a lot of the Canadian population, and if enough government officials see this sort of thing, they're going to start to think, okay, there's a lot of people who are interested in this, and then they start talking about it more. The other thing I'll mention, I don't know a ton about this, Tyler knows a little more than I do, but there's a season of creation that's been sort of written into the regular church calendar, and from what I read is it's kind of an initiative from the United Church in Australia, and the ELCIC has endorsed this as well, and so they take 2 months or 8 weeks worth of time from in September, I think it is.
Yeah, we were talking about it.
September to Thanksgiving.
It varies. Just to comment, last summer we were on vacation, and in Duluth there was a congregation, and they do theirs in late June, early July, coinciding with some broader emphases in and around the city and Lake Superior.
Is that what you see as being the biggest function of the greening accreditation program? Or is there a more tangible benefit, taxation, like, I don't know, some kind of subsidy on taxes or something like that for being a green church, or I don't know?
Not that I'm aware of. I think it's kind of...
for the spirit of environmentalism more so than...
Yeah, and ultimately, being greener is being more economical. Because if you're able to bring down your consumption within your church of electricity, you know, converting your halogen or incandescent light bulbs to LED lights, yes, it's more expensive up front, but when it comes to ongoing costs, you're brought way down. And even just things like when you're not using your sanctuary, lower the temperature, things like that. So there's some like sort of self-interest pieces to it that you're going to benefit from, but then you get a little certificate that you can put up on your pastor's office wall, or it's a pride thing.
Yeah, it nurtures all of the members of the church to live that way outside of the church, I think, would be more tangible, actually. That they're
Exactly.
feeling involved and empowered and inspired and supported, and go on to do that on their own.
Jeff mentioned the statement on responsible extraction of resources. That was a joint statement between Anglicans and Lutherans. It happened at the 2013 Assembly. If two denominations who partner in worship together and other aspects of life, why can't they partner in care for creation, or especially in the 3 areas that we've designated as joint assembly statements, right? So,
Which are?
Pardon?
Which are?
Homelessness, right relationships with Indigenous people, and and then responsible resource extraction. But those were 3 statements that came out of the 2013 Joint Assembly. And that we've made a commitment that we're going to begin those conversations in 2015 to do that together, and to say to all of our congregations, who have you got that wants to come and have this dialogue together and start doing some of this work together. And one of them might be, what if we took on the greening accreditation? And as Jeff said, the statistics are pretty pathetic for us, right? And just with the Lutherans, so.
Yeah, I think there's only like 18 churches who have it, who have the accreditation.
Out of like 600.
Yeah,
Yeah, out of almost 600 congregations, right?
so it's pretty low uptake. But I think a big part of it though isn't like an aversion to wanting to do it. It's just not necessarily knowing enough about it. At least that's my opinion on that.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we look sort of bigger scale as well, like what our global partners are doing. So as the ELCIC, we're members of the Lutheran World Federation, and as that, it connects us with the World Council of Churches. We're connected with ACT Alliance and Christian Aid. There's a lot of work being done on like the global scale that a lot of people aren't aware of. So like I was saying, I was just at the COP conference in Lima, and I was at COP 18 in Doha, Qatar. Next year, there'll be a delegation going to Paris. Last year, there was a delegation in Warsaw. And in 2010 at the LWF General Assembly, the youth delegation brought forward a statement on climate justice. And the LWF has really taken that on strongly and have really taken this seriously now, and it's become one of their major pushing points. But so, climate policy in its like nuts and bolts isn't where the LWF is really pushing. But so, my role at that conference was to sort of hear all the conversations and the negotiations going on, interpret that for our own context, and bring that information home, and share that information among our own people. And so the big thing that we're concerned about with climate change is the notion of climate justice. And it has become a social justice issue, the effects of climate change. We are seeing effects on the ground already. And the Lutheran World Federation, being a very large contributor to the UNHCR and so like national or international development and relief work, we see firsthand the effects. We're already coming into issues of internally displaced people as a result of climate change. With sea level rise, we've seen legitimate climate refugees who have lost their islands in the South Pacific because of sea level rise. And so we need to take care of not just our like Lutheran brothers and sisters, but just we have a responsibility to make sure that everyone has a fair opportunity to survive. One of the initiatives that the LWF kind of helped initiate, and it's now it's become much bigger than the Lutherans. It's supported by Climate Action Network International, so a secular organization. World Council of Churches and ACT Alliance really helped promote it, and it's the Fast for the Climate campaign, which is fasting on the first of every month in solidarity with our brothers and sisters who aren't being heard with their concerns and their firsthand experience of the negative effects of climate change. And leading up to the Paris COP, there's going to be a person fasting every day of the year. So that's the climate, or fast for the Climate 365. It's all good websites, very active on social media. Climate Justice Campaign. And when you look at the World Council of Churches and ACT Alliance, Christian Aid, Bread for the World, these are organizations that, even like as Anglicans, you're also connected to ACT Alliance, World Council of Churches. They have dedicated staff who follow climate change policy discussions. And so when I was in Lima, our delegation was 10 people from the Lutheran World Federation. The delegation from Acton Alliance and World Council of Churches was probably double ours. And those are the people who are following like the negotiations, and so they're able to sort of interpret what's happening for us, and then we interpret it for everyone else, because the language they use is very inaccessible unless you're very familiar with what's actually going on in these negotiations.
Sorry, when you say inaccessible, is it just because it's so filled with bureaucratic jargon, or so much filled with scientific terminology?
It's not scientific at all.
No, okay.
There's no longer debate about climate change. Just this last year, they've kind of changed the terminology for climate change skeptics. That's no longer a thing. They're now just known as climate science deniers. And because there was a study, like a statistical analysis of all the climate science projects done in the last 20 years, and 97% are clearly showing that climate change is happening, and it's being accelerated and affected negatively by humans. So it's statistically 100% basically. Take that margin of error in, like it, and so they don't even talk about the science anymore. Now they're saying, okay, if we can reduce or keep global temperature rise to 1.5%, this is where we need to be in terms of carbon reduction. If we're going to limit it at 2 degrees, this is where we need to be by this point. And so the science is not being discussed anymore. It's more so, where is the political will? And it's not there. There's a number of civil society organizations that go to these conferences, and that's where the push is, but we need to be able to bring that information back and really get some traction on the ground. So yeah, I've really gone kind of off track a little bit.
I had a question about, you have up there God, Creation, and Climate Change Study. What is that one?
Oh, the LW, it's available on the LWF website. It's a booklet that has a number of different like climate change studies and where we stand. Very similar to what Tyler was talking about with some of the theological foundations and just good discussion questions.
Oh, do you mean study as in you could have a study about it?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
yeah. Sorry,
Okay.
it's like an actual
Got it.
study booklet that
Okay.
they have, study resource.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I'm just here to talk about what we've been doing in St. Mark's. Not that it's the only way to do things, but that's what's worked for us so far. So I guess all of us that are involved in the Care for Creation at our church, and I think just as, you know, people of faith, this is something we believe, right? Little actions do a lot. So yeah, that can relate to your faith, you know, serving others, and it definitely works with caring for creation too. So just keep that in mind while we're talking. So our approach involves a few things, but I think this was brought up probably this morning, but also a little bit in our discussion earlier today too, is just intentionality. So just naming it, saying, you know what, we care about our world that we live in, and we want to be intentional about living it out that way. So that's a big part of it. And then involving in our church, it was sort of like, okay, we have this working group who cares about the environment, but there's 5 of us. So now how do we get other people? I think, Becky, you asked about this before, like how do you motivate other people? How do you empower people to believe in this? So we thought of some ways to involve other groups in our church, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then, yeah, just practical solutions. So we've talked a bit about them this morning. We do composting in our church, we do recycling, but a few years ago we decided to get on board with Winnipeg Harvest. They have a program called Grow a Row, which you can do in your backyard, in your balcony, on the boulevard of your street. We decided to do it at our church. You basically dedicate a certain amount of the vegetables that you grow, and you donate it to Winnipeg Harvest. So yeah, intentionality. Tyler talked a little bit about this before. Our words have a big impact. So Rick was mentioning being at a service where they used, I don't know if it was liturgy particularly, or just the Care for Creation season.
Yeah, liturgy is
Yeah.
sort of like
Yeah, and we've
framing
talked.
the word.
Yeah, I've experienced that too at a United Church, and it was so amazing how just a little bit of difference in what you're saying in your prayers or your blessings bringing the idea or the imagery of creation into it makes a big difference and sort of just reminds you again, you know, that we are a larger part of this world and nature. So, you know, intentionality in our words. In our worship, we did do a little bit of a season of creation. We tried it during Lent last year. I actually have just one print off. I didn't do photocopies, but I'll just pass it around and you can see what we did was we picked for all the weeks in Lent. We had kind of a focus. We put in the bulletins as well as in the newsletter, and we had imagery up on the PowerPoint screen that went with the theme for the week, and sort of just getting people to think in their own lives, hey, let's talk about water this week. Okay, what can we do in our own lives to save water, or think about how water is important to us as people and what it means for creation. So that's one example of how we brought it into our worship. And then in our community, what we're trying to do is, I guess, yeah, just branch out into all the different groups and say, okay, so, you know, the Sunday school groups. So how do you guys see greening your area of the church? Because every church has different committees that do different functions, and what works for one might not work for another, and we want to just be able to empower those people to think of their own ways that it can work, and then hopefully, you know, bring that out into their own lives as well. When you start to think about using resources carefully and caring for the environment, it affects other areas that we want to see positive change in, you know, so the ability to grow food, so cut down on the amount of grass that we're trying to fertilize and water and cut, growing something to eat instead, and then feeding those people who don't have that food. Like it puts check marks in lots of boxes that we'd like to, you know, say, hey, we're doing some good work in these areas. So, and again, I don't know if climate justice, that title to me sort of symbolizes that. I don't know if you would say that's what it means, but just thinking, okay, yeah, there's pollution, we better cut down, you know, global warming kind of thing. It's not just that, it's seeing how the way we live in a consumptive way affects other areas of our community, right? And sort of once you start making positive changes in one, it really affects all the rest. So, yeah, so I guess at our church, again, you know, I don't even remember who came up talking about this, and you know, we're all excited about the idea, of course, but it could have stopped there. So when you're being intentional about something, it's really important, and we have to thank Rick for this. He really kind of got us to force us to keep coming back together and actually make goals. So that's why we're here today. And then, yeah, just making them a priority and just saying, okay, you know, even if we start small, these are the things we want to do this year. When we've had brainstorming sessions, we've come up with tons of great ideas, but you can't just implement them all at once. So I believe that being intentional is about that too, is just saying, hey, even if we start small, as the slide was before, you know, small things make a difference. So. Yeah, so this was a bit of what I was saying before, is we want to get together with each different committee in our church and sort of brainstorm with them and be able to get them motivated in their own areas of the church life to do stuff. Now, we did a workshop a little different than this at our own church in May. I guess the major difference was that we had one of our other members, Jeremy. He talked a lot about this organization called Transition Network. So they were started, I think, in the UK, but they're kind of all over the world. And it's basically a way of doing grassroots organization for climate issues, but also for poverty issues. So if I didn't have time to put kind of stuff about that in here, but it's a really good resource. So if you look it up, they have lots of videos. The thing that drew me to them was they had a subway station in London where they just had this platform that had these empty planters. I guess there used to be flowers in there or whatever. So someone had the idea, hey, let's grow vegetables here. So there's this one subway line in the UK you can take, and every stop that you get off on, they have vegetables growing on these platforms. So, and that was initiated by one of these transition network groups that just looked in their community and said, hey, what can we do? What's our vision for our community for the next 10 years, and sort of how do we implement that? And inevitably, in every one of the examples I have on this group, it's always, you know, interdimensional, like we were just talking about, not just climate or nature, things like that. It always involves, you know, other areas of need in the community. So,
Where did you get this?
So this came from, I went off on a tangent, but when we had our other workshop, we talked a lot about, just climate change and just things that we would want for the future. We had a brainstorming session at the end, which people just started throwing out ways. If we said, hey, how would you make your church green? This is some of the things we came up with. So we thought today we can have that same kind of discussion here, but I just put this up for an example, or to sort of get your juices flowing in your brain about what kind of things you could do. And as you guys were saying earlier, you know, they don't have to be huge things, but they make a difference. So this is one of my favorites. I don't know. I just had to put it up because I really think it's sort of what Jeff was saying. You know, it's no longer about, oh, should we, shouldn't we? It's kind of like, okay, why wouldn't we? You know, so.
In congregations, we have an opportunity to try things that we may not be able to do as individuals or as households on our own at home kind of thing. And I think we really should sort of do that. Like, I mean, I've put this idea out there in conversation a few times, and I think it maybe is more on the extreme side of experimenting, but like a composting toilet. It sounds like a pretty foreign and unusual thing, and it'd be a lot for one family to put in their home, but as a congregation, you can probably come up with the funds and a way of doing it kind of thing. And then realize that it's not such a big deal. Same with, I mean, lots of congregations have adopted fair trade coffee.
Yeah, we have that.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
that's great, yeah.
Like those kinds of things, like sometimes people will go, oh, well, the cost is going to be through the roof, or, I mean, where are we going to find that? And all of a sudden, as soon as you start looking a little bit or start digging around, it's not as big a deal as you think. And I think that's where change can happen on a broader scale, too. People can adopt that for themselves, individuals and groups.